Mr. Creepycore here. Subscribe our channel for daily creepypasta stories.
I went to an abandoned Scottish island. I know why they left. A Mr. Creepycore original creepypasta. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. There's something about the silence of spaces where human voices once echoed, where lives were lived and then simply stopped. So when I got the opportunity to visit one of Scotland's abandoned islands for my doctoral research in folklore, I jumped at it without a second thought. I should have thought twice. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I'm an anthropologist specializing in isolated communities and the folklore traditions that emerge from geographic isolation. I'd spent 3 years studying the evacuation records from various Scottish islands, Street Kilda, Mingulay, Eilean Nan Ra superscript 2n, and I'd become particularly obsessed with one island that barely appeared in any official documentation. The locals I'd interviewed on the mainland refused to even say its name out loud, referring to it only as the Grey Place or the island that watches. I finally found a reference to it in a crumbling church registry from 1847. The island was called Eilean Dorcha, Dark Island in Gaelic. According to the single paragraph I could find, 37 families had lived there for generations, surviving on seabird eggs, sheep, and fishing. In the spring of 1912, every single resident vanished over the course of a single night. Not evacuated. Vanished. The registry entry was brief and disturbing: all souls departed. Houses remain. Food still warm on tables. May God have mercy on what remains. I should have stopped there. Any reasonable person would have. But I'd already submitted my grant proposal, and my university had approved funding for a 2-week solo research expedition. I'd chartered a boat, arranged for supplies, and prepared my equipment. I was going to Eilean Dorcha whether the locals approved or not. The boat captain who agreed to take me was a weathered man in his 70s named Callum. He had the deep-set eyes of someone who'd spent most of his life staring at the horizon, and when I told him where I wanted to go, those eyes went even darker. "You're making a mistake, lass," he said, his Highland accent thick as fog. "That island, it's not a place for the living anymore." "I'm a scientist," I told him, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I don't believe in ghost stories." He looked at me for a long moment, his calloused hands gripping the ship's wheel. "It's not ghosts you should worry about. It's what's still awake out there." Despite his warnings, Callum kept his word. 3 days later, I found myself on the deck of his fishing boat, watching as Eilean Dorcha emerged from the morning mist like something rising from the depths of a nightmare. The island was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 3 miles long and a mile wide, dominated by sheer cliffs on the western side that rose from the Atlantic like the walls of a fortress. The eastern shore where we approached was gentler, with a small natural harbor and a crumbling stone pier that looked like it might collapse if I breathed on it too hard. But it was the village that made my blood run cold. I'd seen photographs of abandoned Scottish island communities before: Herta on St. Kilda, the ghost village on Mingulay. Those places had the melancholy beauty of ruins, slowly being reclaimed by nature and time. This was different. The stone cottages were intact. Too intact. Their roofs hadn't collapsed, their walls hadn't crumbled. They stood in 2 perfect rows along what must have been the main street, 16 houses in total, their dark windows watching the harbor like empty eye sockets. Between them, I could see what looked like a church with a tall spire, and beyond that, some kind of larger building, maybe a community hall or schoolhouse. "I'll be back in 14 days, Callum said as he helped me unload my supplies onto the rickety pier. Not a day earlier, not a day later. If you're not here at dawn on the 14th day, I'm leaving without you. Why wouldn't I be here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just handed me my final bag, crossed himself, which surprised me, as I'd pegged him as the type who hadn't been to church in decades, and returned to his boat. I watched the boat become a speck on the horizon before I finally turned to face the village. The silence was the first thing I noticed. I'd spent time on other remote Scottish islands, and there was always sound, wind whistling through stone, seabirds crying, waves crashing against rocks. But here, the silence was absolute. Oppressive. It pressed against my eardrums like physical weight. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the stones as I made my way up from the pier. I'd set up my base camp in the first cottage I came to. It seemed like the logical choice, closest to my exit point. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a creak that shattered the silence, and I stepped inside. The interior made my skin crawl. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but underneath that dust, the cottage looked like someone might return at any moment. A kettle sat on the hearth. A shawl hung from a peg by the door. A table was set for a meal that had never been eaten, the dishes still in place, though whatever food had once been on them had long since rotted away or been consumed by vermin. But there were no rats. No mice. No spiders in the corners. No insects of any kind. Just dust and silence and the overwhelming sense that I was being watched. I spent the first day documenting the village, taking photographs and measurements, making detailed notes of everything I saw. Every cottage told the same story, people who'd left in a hurry, but not so much of a hurry that they'd taken anything with them. Clothes still hung in wardrobes. Tools remained in their places. Books sat on shelves. In one house, I found a baby's cradle with a small knitted blanket still tucked inside. It was in the church that I found the first real clue about what had happened. The church was the largest building in the village, a stone structure with beautiful stained glass windows that had somehow survived over a century of abandonment. The pews were arranged in neat rows facing a simple altar, and on that altar sat a single book. Not a Bible, as I'd expected. This was something else, a journal, bound in leather that had aged to a deep, tobacco brown. The pages were covered in dense handwriting, partly in English and partly in what I recognized as Scottish Gaelic. I carefully photographed each page before attempting to read them. The later entries were in English, and what I read there made my hands shake. The journal belonged to the island's minister, a man named Reverend Alistair Mackay. His early entries were mundane: births, marriages, deaths, the daily rhythms of island life. But starting in the winter of 1911, the tone changed dramatically. December 3, 1911. Angus Ferguson's daughter says she saw something in the water beyond the western cliffs. She described it as a face beneath the waves, watching with eyes that knew her name. I told her it was a seal, though I myself have felt something watching from those depths. The old women call it the glaistig. I fear it may be something older than even our ancestors knew. January 17, 1912. 3 families report the same dream, a woman's voice calling to them from the sea, speaking in a tongue none of them recognize yet somehow understand. The words are always the same: return what was taken. Feed what hungers. Remember the old covenant. I have searched the church records but can find no mention of any covenant. February 29, 1912. Fishermen refuse to put their boats in the water. They say the fish they catch now have strange patterns on their scales, symbols that hurt to look at. Young Malcolm MacLeod brought me one to examine, and I confess it filled me with profound unease. The pattern seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. March 15, 1912. Children are singing a song they claim to have learned from The Lady in the Water. I have forbidden them to sing it, but I hear it in my dreams now. The melody is beautiful and terrible. It makes me want to walk into the sea. The final entry was dated March 21, 1912. Tonight is the spring equinox. The elders have confessed something to me, something their grandparents made them swear never to reveal to outsiders or to the church. This island was not always ours. Before the crofters came, before even the Vikings, there was something else here. Something that lived between the sea and the land, something that made a bargain with the first people who settled this place. Every generation, on the night of the spring equinox, they would give an offering to keep it satisfied. Keep it sleeping. But 60 years ago, when the minister at that time forbade the old practices and demanded the islanders embrace Christian doctrine completely, the offering stopped. Now it's waking up. I can feel it in my bones, in the very stones of this church. Tonight they plan to resume the old practice, to offer what was promised. They have asked me to lead them in prayer before they go to the western cliffs. God forgive me, but I will not stop them. Because I have seen what swims in the deep waters beyond our shores, and it is not something that prayer alone can compel back to sleep. If anyone reads this, know that we did what we had to do. We went willingly. We remembered the covenant. The sea takes, and the sea provides. And tonight, the sea has demanded its price. I sat in that empty church for a long time after reading those words, my heart hammering against my ribs. The light was fading outside, and I realized I'd spent far longer reading than I'd intended. I needed to get back to my cottage before dark. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. On the wall behind the altar, barely visible in the dim light, was a mural. Not a painting, these symbols had been carved directly into the stone, then filled with something dark that might have been ink or might have been something else. The symbols weren't Gaelic or Norse or any language I recognized. They seemed to writhe in the fading light, and the longer I looked at them, the more my head began to ache. I forced myself to look away and practically ran from the church. That first night in the cottage, I didn't sleep at all. I'd set up my sleeping bag near the hearth, and I lay there in the darkness, listening to the silence. Except it wasn't quite silent anymore. As the hours crept past midnight, I began to hear something. A sound so faint I thought I might be imagining it. Singing. It was coming from the direction of the western cliffs, a woman's voice carrying a melody that was hauntingly beautiful. The words weren't in any language I knew, but somehow, impossibly, I found myself understanding fragments of meaning. Come. Remember. Feed. Home. I wanted to go to it. God help me, I wanted to stand up, walk out of that cottage, and follow that voice wherever it led. My hand was actually on the door handle before I managed to wrench myself back to consciousness, to reality. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner farthest from the door, my hands pressed over my ears, humming loudly to drown out that terrible, beautiful song. When dawn finally came, I made a decision. I was going to the western cliffs. Not because the voice was calling me. I'd stuffed my ears with cotton to block out any sound, but because I needed to see. I needed to understand what the islanders had been so afraid of. The walk to the western edge of Eilean Dorca took me through terrain that grew increasingly hostile. The gentle grasses of the village gave way to rough heather, then to bare rock. I could taste salt in the air, and the wind that had been absent in the village picked up until it was howling in my ears, trying to push me back. When I finally reached the cliffs, I understood why the Reverend had mentioned them specifically. The western cliffs were sheer vertical drops that plunged at least 200 feet to the churning Atlantic below. But that wasn't what made my breath catch. Carved into the cliff face, visible only when standing at the very edge and looking down, were massive symbols, the same symbols I'd seen in the church, but here they were enormous, each one probably 30 feet across. And they were arranged in a circle around a natural formation in the rocks below a pool that even from this height I could see was perfectly circular, far too perfect to be natural. The water in that pool was absolutely still despite the waves crashing around it, and it was dark. Not the dark blue or green of the ocean, but black. Absolutely black. As I stared down at it, trying to process what I was seeing, the wind suddenly died. Just stopped. And in that moment of perfect calm, I saw something move in the pool. Something large. Something that made the water ripple despite the fact that the surface had been glass smooth a moment before. And then, rising from that black water, I saw it. A face. I can't adequately describe what I saw. My mind tried to process it as human, but the proportions were all wrong. The eyes were too large, too far apart, and they reflected the weak sunlight like a cat's eyes, but the color was wrong, a pale, sickly green that seemed to emit its own faint glow. The skin was gray, mottled like stone that had been underwater for centuries. And the mouth. When it opened, I saw rows and rows of teeth, not arranged like human teeth but spiraling inward like some deep-sea creature. But worst of all was the expression. Because it was looking directly at me, and I could see intelligence there. Ancient, alien intelligence that recognized me as something small and insignificant and infinitely useful. It smiled. I ran. I don't remember much about the journey back to the village, just fragments of memory, feet pounding on stone, lungs burning, the cotton falling out of my ears and that singing voice filling my head again, closer now, clearer. She was singing about a covenant, about offerings, about 37 families who had walked into the sea rather than break their promise again. When I burst into my cottage, I immediately started packing. I would wait on the pier, I decided. I would wait all 14 days if I had to, but I was not staying in this village another night. But as I was frantically stuffing my belongings into my bags, I noticed something that made me freeze. On my desk, next to my laptop, was the leather journal from the church. I hadn't brought it with me. I'd left it on the altar, I was certain of it. With trembling hands, I opened it. There was a new entry, written in fresh ink that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was the same as the Reverend's, but the words. "You've seen it now. You've looked into the deep pool where it waits. And now it has seen you too. Did you think you could come here, to this place where the covenant was made and broken and made again, without paying the price? There must always be 37. When we walked into the sea, we believed we were ending it. We were wrong. We were just the latest payment. Now there are only 36. You'll make 37 again." I slammed the journal shut and ran out of the cottage. I made it to the pier just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that looked like blood and fire. And that's when I saw them. Walking up from the water, leaving wet footprints on the stones, were figures. 36 of them, men and women and children, wearing the rotted remnants of early 20th century clothing. Their skin was gray and mottled like the thing I'd seen in the pool. Their eyes glowed with that same sickly green light. They were singing. All of them. The same song I'd been hearing since the first night. I recognized faces from the photographs I'd seen in the cottages. The baby from the cradle, though it hadn't been a baby for a very long time. The fisherman whose boat still sat rotting at the pier. The Reverend himself, his minister's collar still visible around his neck despite the decay. They formed a circle around me on the pier, still singing, and I understood then what the covenant was. What it had always been. Every generation, the thing in the deep pool needed to be fed. It needed human lives, human souls, to sustain it in its sleep. When the offering stopped, it woke. When it woke, it took not just one or two, but entire communities. It took them and kept them, suspended between life and death, between land and sea, as eternal offerings. But it was hungry again. And it needed one more. I'm writing this on my phone as they close in. I don't know if anyone will ever read it. I've set it to upload automatically to my cloud storage, though I doubt there's signal out here. But if you do read this, if you're an anthropologist or a folklorist or just someone fascinated by abandoned places, please understand. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some covenants are made in blood and salt water. Some things that sleep in the deep places should never be disturbed. The singing is getting louder now. The Reverend is reaching for me with hands that are both human and something else entirely. Behind them all, I can see the sea rising higher than it should, forming into a shape that's massive and terrible and beautiful all at once. She's coming for me. The thing they call the Glaystig, though I know that's not her real name. Her real name is older than names, older than language. It's the sound of the tide pulling back before a storm. It's the cry of seabirds who've seen their own deaths. It's the song I've been hearing since I first set foot on this cursed island. And now I'm hearing another voice too, my own voice, joining the chorus. My feet are moving without my permission, walking toward the edge of the pier. The water below is black and still, and I can see shapes moving beneath the surface. 36 shapes, and soon to be 37. The covenant must be maintained. The deep pool must be fed. The thing that was old when the world was young must have its due. I'm so sorry I came here. I'm so sorry I disturbed what should have remained lost. But most of all, I'm sorry that I won't be the last. Because islands like this exist all over Scotland, all over the world. Places where the old things still sleep, where ancient bargains still hold. And there are always more researchers, more adventurers, more people who think the old warnings are just stories. The water's so close now. It looks almost inviting. The singing promises peace, promises an end to fear. Promises that in the deep, in the dark, in the cold embrace of the covenant, I'll finally understand. They say the sea gives, and the sea takes. Tonight, the sea takes. And somewhere, on some other forgotten island, in some other deep pool, something else is waking up. Waiting for the next person who doesn't believe in the old stories. Waiting for the next 37th soul. God help whoever comes looking for me.